Welcome to all you wanderers, seekers, healers, and many more. My name is Erik Roth, a shamanic astrologer, and I'm here with another episode of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. And we got another great presentation here to talk about an astrological thing that happens every year. Planets, all of the planets do this on some level, with the exception of the sun and the moon going retrograde. So I'm excited to talk about this particular one that's coming up here at the end of June of this year, 2022. And lots to discuss in this video about Neptune. So why don't we get started and get ready to download this information. Feel free to, after this is over, to like and share the video, to subscribe if you really like this and want to hear more. This is what I do. I'm an astrologer, and I love to share about what's coming up in the sky and within ourselves, and our relationship to the earth and sky, and what that means astrologically and more. This is episode 36 of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms, Retrograde Neptune and Pisces. This happens again every year, and it happens a few days different from one year to the next year. Neptune moves very, very slowly, but it's important to discuss this because sometimes we can get a sort of a lack of full understanding of what it means when a planet goes retrograde, in particular the outer planets. And they spend a lot of time every single year in retrograde motion. So it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It simply is more neutral, but it creates a certain a particular wavelength that's going on within us as we have our relationship with Neptune and the solar system and the Earth. All right, so what we're going to discuss today is Neptune retrograde, shamanic astrology and Neptune, and then Neptune and Pisces, as well as the transits. So I'm going to be at the end of the video talking about when Neptune not only was in Pisces before, but what other signs during which years Neptune was in the other signs. So just going to give you a lowdown of that as we get closer to the end of the video itself. All right. So when will Neptune go retrograde? Well, that's June 28th of 2022, and it stays retrograde for over 5 months until December 3rd of 2022. And we can see it starts retrograde on June 28th, stations retrograde 25 degrees, 26 minutes Pisces. And then it reaches its opposition with the sun, which is a halfway mark between the station retrograde point and the station direct point. And you'll find that with just about every retrograde planet, with the exception of Venus and Mercury, which orbit between the Earth and the sun. So they don't have oppositions with the sun. It's when they have conjunctions with the sun that we get to that point there. Okay, so that's September 16th, and that happens at 24 degrees and 1 minute Pisces. The signs, these are the signs of Pisces, not the constellations. And then October 11th and November 19th, there's 2 squares with Mars, while Mars is in Gemini. That's a whole separate topic altogether. I'll be doing a whole video about that, and there'll be a webinar that Daniel Giamario and I will be doing over the summer here about Mars and Gemini, and probably another one during its time of when Mars is retrograde in the fall. Those happen at 23:21 Pisces and 22:42 Pisces, respectively. And then lastly, December 3rd, when Neptune stations direct, that's at 22 degrees and 38 minutes in Pisces. So, all right, outer planet retrogrades. This is going to apply to all the outer planets, and really, it also applies to the inner planets to some degree. It's just that the movement of the inner planets is a little bit different because it's within the orbit of Earth rather than outside of Earth's orbit. So an outer planet going retrograde is when the Earth catches up to the planet in question in its retrograde orbit. In the sky, the planet has a apparent backwards movement against the sky. That means it's like, it's not in actuality moving backwards. It means that I think we can think of it as when you're, let's say you're in a vehicle and you're passing a slower vehicle, perhaps on a curve. It looks like, to some degree, it looks like the car, maybe depending on how we perceive it, the car can look like it's moving backwards. But in actuality, we're just moving a lot faster than the other vehicle, or sometimes a little bit faster. And then, again, that's against the sky, the background of the sky, and due to the orbit of the Earth. It resumes its regular direct motion after some time when the Earth passes the outer planet, including Neptune. In shamanic astrology, this backwards movement, or retrograde movement, it places emphasis upon the zodiacal degrees in the area of the sky, which includes any stars that it might be passing. So I'm going to be sharing with you the area of the sky that Neptune will be stationed retrograde in, and we'll also talk about what the retrograde means and the particular Sabian symbol around that as well, and what Neptune is in general, as in addition to that. Okay, so just a synopsis, a brief synopsis of the outer planet retrogrades, how long they spend in retrograde outside of Mars's orbit. So from Jupiter on outward. Jupiter, closest in to us here on Earth, only spends about 3 3/4 months in retrograde, so close to 4 months. Saturn, almost 4.5 months in retrograde, or about roughly 4.5 months. Chiron, 4 months, anywhere from 4 months and a couple of days to about 5 months and a week. Its orbit varies considerably over its 50 to 51 years when it completes an orbit around the sun. Uranus, on the other hand, spends almost exactly 5 months in retrograde. Neptune, about 5 months and a week, roughly. And that's the planet we're talking about in this episode. Pluto, about 5 1/3 months, so just a bit longer than Neptune. But Eris, which has a 500 and over 550-year orbit around the sun, almost spends 6 months in retrograde. So basically, close to half its time in the sky, it spends going backwards. Again, Eris moves very, very slowly, so obviously it's not visible to the naked eye. And you know, if you were to study that with a powerful telescope, it would be, it would be imperceptible, with the exception of just really being able to measure it mathematically. But that's, it moves only, currently at its time, moves only about roughly 1/4 of a degree per year in actually gaining through the zodiac there. But Neptune, only 5 1/4 months. It has 165-year orbit on average. And it's the planet that is also, like Venus, it's nearly circular in orbit. That means it has the lowest amount of eccentricity to it in regards to the other planets that are orbiting our sun. Now, where will Neptune station retrograde? Well, we can see right here. This is on June 28th. This is the sky in the early morning sky on June 28th. Neptune is right here at the very edge of the fish and only 4.5 degrees away from the vernal equinox point, or March equinox point. And that would be spring in the northern hemisphere and autumn in the southern hemisphere. But Neptune, every year, it moves a few degrees, and by 2026, it'll start to, 2025 to 2026, it'll start to move into the sign of Aries. So something to prepare for around that. We can see it's inching closer and closer to that point. We can see Jupiter here, which passed Neptune back in April of 2022. Chiron here, also in the middle degrees of Aries, and Mars having just passed Chiron on its way to Taurus and Gemini later this year. But what would be the star field here? Well, this would be kind of sort of in between the zone of the water bear and the fish, closer to the fish in general. And the fish is this full constellation, what astronomers still call Pisces, but not to be confused with the sign of Pisces. This is the fish jumping out of the water, out of the cosmic waters into the sky above this yellow line, which is yellow-orange line, which is the ecliptic here on this map. And it's bringing, it's like splashing, and almost a play with it, an innocence with it, and a connection to the mystical realm with droplets of water connecting it, chords or droplets connecting it to the water itself. So it kind of lives in between worlds, if you will, the fish themselves, in as far as the projection into the sky. Has also a very strong connection to the feminine in ancient times. And this is just something to be aware of as you go out into the sky and look for it. You won't be able to see Neptune, it's too dim to see with the naked eye. But if you know where Jupiter is, which is really bright and gets brighter until it reaches its opposition later this year, which is in the early fall, late summer into the early fall. That's when you can kind of measure that roughly in this space. In fact, Jupiter will be close to the equinox point by then. And so if you just move to the right a little bit with your eyes and below this kind of hexagonal shape, that's where Neptune will be right there. So Neptune and Jupiter do get relatively close to each other in the fall here in the northern hemisphere. Again, if that would be the spring in the southern hemisphere. And so they still have a little bit of energy together towards the end of this year to experience when Jupiter moves back into Pisces for a couple of months, which will be something we can talk about later. But there's no actual like major stars in this area, especially along the ecliptic. So it's this all what I've shared about this part of the sky is something that is kind of, you might say, add into the space of Neptune, which is strongly resonant with the sign of Pisces. So Neptune being in the sign of Pisces, which from a traditional astrological point, Jupiter used to rule, quote, Pisces, and when Neptune was discovered, Neptune, quote, rules Pisces. So there's a great resonance and connection between the sign of Pisces and the planet Neptune. If you add that all in, it just adds to the mystical, non-linear, and non-reality type of energy there. It's heartfelt, heart-centered, greater connection and deeper level celestial connection with Source itself, or we can call it the divine. And above just straddling the waters here in the cosmic sea. And all of that symbolism is kind of funnels into where Neptune is, and our relationship to Neptune currently. And I'll share more about that and what that means. All right, so Neptune by itself in shamanic astrology is a potent symbol for the celestial or upper world. Its qualities bring an underlying current of non-linear time, mystical vibrations. Neptune orients us beyond materiality into the land whereupon dreams and divination meld together. It can bring in a Pisces-like feel with an expanded heart and sensitivity of our feelings. But with that activity, it can challenge our sense of reality through confusion and freedom from that reality. Neptune can act as a dissolving agent to our attachments, goals, and other plans while introducing a feeling of being lost. Things are more transitory and uncertain in general. It is through Neptune, however, where grace can be discovered. It is a planet that can open minds if we allow ourselves not to resist or force things to happen at all costs. It can also be a planet that throws into the space of us living in a space of illusion where we think it's our reality, but it really isn't our reality. Like we're living in a particular, maybe a dream, but turns out to be not something that we can actually manifest. However, a word of caution there. With Neptune, there the, the manifestation, the mystical realm can take place here in the real world, meaning that if we live in harmony with our path and we connect into that space and Neptune's with us, then Neptune can be a very strong ally in our path. And at times we might even think, oh no, this can't be real, but we connect into that space and yeah, we may like have a mystical partnership. I have mystical experiences. We have mystical pathways for us to co-create in the world. Neptune creates that, allows our, you might say, the dissolving of the ego, and allows our heart and spirit to soar into the celestial realm. This is part of being human. This is part of the qualities of who we are. And the worst thing that can happen is you repress that part of yourself and are not consciously aware of perhaps illusions or other things out there that might not be real, but and even the spirit itself. But so Neptune allows that. Neptune retrograde kind of emphasizes that. So the retrograde in Pisces is about allowing ourselves to drift off and let go of the stresses in our lives. We can open up to the great oneness of the cosmos and divine in ourselves, intimately connecting with Source, including Gaia. On a third dimensional level, this may feel unsteady, as reality holds little weight from a Neptunian celestial perspective. There is a sense of impermanence in our journey, in that all things can end, leaving new roads to appear. Leaving to new roads to appear and repeating the cycle over and over again. So we could say even leaving old roads and new ones appearing, but not really understanding it perhaps of our current direction, but just simply going with it. Daniel Giamaro, who is the person I studied originally with in the body of knowledge that is the system that is shamanic astrology, he considers like Neptune transits in particular, especially for personal transits, a sense of a walkabout, a dream walk for humanity, for each of us. And for on a global level, Neptune's always present, but Neptune of Pisces is definitely a very strong walkabout. And so what's happening on this planet is in part due to our experiences and relationship with Neptune at this stage. And I'm using this word because it fits, but I don't know if it's an actual word. We can say the non-linearity, meaning it's that time itself is not relevant to Neptune. This is a subtly amplified energy on retrograde during its retrograde period. So this may be used to do dream work, spiritual journey, questing, sabbaticals, and intuitive and creative flows of imaginative expressions where the ego takes a back seat. So linear time is just what we're used to in our lives, our going about our day, going to sleep, waking up, calling our friends and family, connecting with our loved ones, going to work, picking up our kids from school, planning our vacation, so forth and so on. That's linear time. Nonlinear time is sort of like this place where time may not fully exist, and yet it's present in the real world. So it's for us to work with that consciously and to allow our hearts and spirits to be strongly part of that space, where sometimes it doesn't matter, that linear time doesn't really matter. That's just more of our third dimensional reality, and sometimes it gets weighted way too much to the exclusion of everything else. But this Neptune Pisces retrograde can also open up to the illusions of some realities that may be more transitory, meaning they could highlight what is not meant to be or is simply, quote, wishful thinking and cannot manifest in reality. So it's up to us to have a little bit more discernment, but also to simply go with the flow, to be in that space and to not necessarily try to force something to happen or to resist it. Obviously, if it's really toxic, you don't want to invite it into your life. But if it's something that you're seeing, you're not sure about, just simply maybe try it out, go with it, and see what opens up in that space. Okay, so here's the Sabian symbol of Neptune. I usually use this for the full moons and the new moons. In this case, I'm going to use it for the Neptune retrograde point, which this is drawn from Linda Hill's the Sabian Oracle book, and I fully recommend it because she draws from uh, uh, Mark Edmund Jones and others, Dane Bajar, other astrologers for this information. So it's really beautiful, well written, lots of powerful symbolism in that. So when you look at Sabian symbols, you always add 1 to the degree because the Sabian symbols go from 1 to 30, whereas the degrees in the zodiac are from 0 to 29. So the symbol of this is a new moon reveals that it's time for people to go ahead with their different projects. So it looks kind of very constructive, uh, with regards to Pisces. They're definitely very constructive. This is not normally what Pisces is, but it brings in the celestial realm into this, a new moon. So it's bringing in that energy from the sky. So 26 Pisces is, the key words are diversifying, applying talents in a different direction, people splitting off and splitting off, new opportunities and potentials, the beginning of a new age, letting go of the old and outworn, separations, embracing one's future without the need for others, coming to a fork in the road, divorces, new jobs, directions, and destinies, the dawning of a new era. This is really fascinating because some of the language here I would look at like, oh, it's not quote final, meaning like say separations, divorces, the need embracing one's future without the need for others. I think that applies primarily to one's entry into a new chapter in their lives, meaning that maybe certain people that one has completed their journey with or that phase of the journey with, and it's time to embark and create your own project. And then also including co-creating with others also as well, which could be new people that you have not worked with perhaps in the past. And so this can come up in that space. Again, this is on June 28th when Neptune stations retrograde. And I love the imagery of the fork in the road, destinies, and the dawning of a new era. We've been in this long Kali Yuga. This is the Hindu calendar, the ages, the Kali meaning the dark, and the Yuga meaning age, so a time period. So we're in that space now, and that time period is ending in a few years. And then we move into a large multi-century transitionary period. In addition, we're also at the end of a 26,000 year, quote, great year. That has to do with the precessional cycle of the wobble of the earth. So when we're completing that, we can see, there's a lot of upset and overturn of paradigms, of structures and systems and cultures. And this means that all this new stuff can come in, and we can open up our hearts. We can realize like, wait a minute, this is not the end. There is going to be a beginning to this, because meaning that not the end of all, meaning that the end, any type of end, always has a beginning to it. Something else is seeded when quote an end happens. So the dawning of a new era certainly applies, and having Neptune be in this space right here with that symbol is pretty profound. All right, so let's take a brief look at Neptune through the signs. And this is, if you wanted to pause this here to kind of look through this, but we're in this current time period between 2011 and 2026. And typically Neptune can transition between 2 years, like in 2025, it starts to move into Aries, but it retrogrades back into Pisces. So 2025, 2026 period, that's when it's transitioning, which is really interesting. It's just after Pluto transits from Capricorn into Aquarius in 2023 and 2024. it's really interesting. And then there's Uranus starts to move into a new sign later, 2026, 2027, from where it is currently in Taurus into the sign of Gemini. So we have all these outer planets here transitioning from one sign to another in the early to mid 2020s. So these are really powerful changes for humanity as we move on. That the last time Neptune was in the sign of Pisces was from 1847 into early 1862. Big transitions for certain parts of the world. China, there was the Taiping Rebellion that was very Piscean, Neptunian in its nature, especially Neptunian, meaning that there was a person who started the rebellion was convinced that he was the chosen by God to rule and to you know to be this new leader to wash out the sins of the world, and there was it lasted multiple years, and millions died from that experience. In America, here in the U.S., there was the Civil War that took place, and that the end of slavery into fighting a war over it, and then abolitionists winning out on that, and a step in the right direction for humanity, and in particular here in the U.S. Meaning that, looking at human beings, all human beings, as human beings, but they still have a long way to go from that period. On 100, we're still in that process now. So we can think back to those time periods and see how far we've come and how much more we have to do as human beings to come together in fairness and equality. So before Neptune was in Pisces, it was in Aquarius from 1998 to 2012. And then when it moves into Aries, starting in 2025, and that'll go on until 2039. So there's a period of time, this transition. We're not too far here on planet Earth. Neptune, more Neptune of Pisces, and then we can move and set our gazes onto another chapter after it moves into the sign of Aries. But I welcome any questions or thoughts, comments on my YouTube channel. Feel free to do that, and you're welcome to contact me with any thoughts, or if you want a reading, questions that you might have. I teach classes. I teach both online and in person. I'm also excited to do future webinar series and interviews. And that's just what I do for a living. So you can find me at inspiralnexus.com, as well as a new webinar series that I'm doing with Caitlin Castell at mystaralchemy.com, showing right there on the video screen. And you can also find find out more about the shamanic astrology paradigm at shamanicastrology.com. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Please like and subscribe if you so choose. And I do have a regular newsletter I send out with more writings and announcements and classes at inspiralnexus.com. I look forward to doing more with you in the near future. And I wish everyone a very peaceful June and upcoming summer here in the north, and upcoming winter in the southern hemisphere. Be well, everyone.